We forgot to invite you to the family trip, my cousin texted from Hawaii, so I canceled the Airbnb I booked for them with my account and watched them all scramble at midnight to find a hotel 3 times the price. I've been turning this tale over in my mind for days, trying to find the right words to describe just how bizarre, infuriating, and downright surreal it all was. If you love stories about chaotic family trips, questionable loyalty, and unexpected acts of revenge, albeit justified if you ask me, then buckle up. You're in for a roller coaster of emotions, half a lifetime's worth of backstory, and a generous serving of karmic payback. A brief family background. Let me start by painting a picture of my family dynamic. We're a large, boisterous clan. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, in-laws, you name it. The group chat often explodes with family updates, ranging from newborn announcements to random memes nobody asked for. We have running jokes that go back a decade, and an infamous sense of collective drama. Whenever we gather for the holidays or a special occasion, you can practically feel the tension and affection swirling like a complicated dance. Everyone loves each other in theory, but there's always some sort of issue simmering beneath the surface. For many years, one highlight of our extended family culture has been an annual group vacation. It started small, just my parents, my siblings, and a few close cousins. Over time, the circle expanded as uncles remarried, cousins brought new partners, and friends of friends somehow tagged along. What used to be a modest trip of 5 or 6 people ballooned into gatherings of 15 or 20. It was logistical bedlam every single year. Someone would inevitably complain about the location, or the cost, or the sleeping arrangements. Yet, for all the headaches, we somehow considered it tradition, one that brought us closer, or so we told ourselves. I got roped into becoming the travel coordinator for these trips when I was in college. I'd studied abroad for a semester and became known as the traveler in the family. People assumed I had magical expertise in booking flights, renting cars, and finding the perfect lodgings. Initially, I was flattered. I used to enjoy digging into all the little details, comparing prices, reading reviews, and drafting itineraries with precision. Plus, I have an Airbnb Superhost rating. I occasionally rent out a small studio I co-own with a friend, which grants me discounts and a reputation that sometimes leads to better deals. My family delighted in the fact that I could often secure us a large house for a fraction of what they might pay if they tried to do it themselves. Over the years, I've booked everything from a 10-bedroom mansion in Orlando for a Disney trip that ended up being more about family fights than theme parks, to a charming ski cabin in Colorado where half the group didn't ski but decided to come anyway just to bicker in the hot tub. These gatherings can be exhausting, but there's usually a sense of camaraderie, like we're enduring something collectively, which creates a certain bond by the end. Choosing Hawaii. This year, after much back and forth, the family finally settled on Hawaii. Why Hawaii? We'd been tossing the idea around for years, but it never worked out. Someone always had a scheduling conflict, or the cost was too high, or the timing was off with school breaks for the little ones. Eventually, enough people managed to clear a window in their calendars for mid-spring. Perfect time to avoid the worst of the tourist crush, or so we thought. I took on the usual tasks, scouring Airbnb and VRBO, reading reviews on Google, triple-checking location details. My phone was a constant companion, loaded with screenshots of various rentals. I even employed my standard tactic of drafting up a short list, 3 or 4 plausible properties, then sending them to the family group chat for a vote. As always, the group chat was a circus. Some of the requests, my Aunt Sharon demanded a place close to grocery stores because she wanted to cook elaborate meals for everyone. Knowing her, she'd end up making a single casserole and calling it a day, but okay. My cousin Tyler insisted that we needed a large outdoor area. He's a fitness nut and claims he can't thrive without morning yoga in the fresh air. My dad asked if there was a rental car package deal. He always tries to be practical, even though I've told him we can compare rates ourselves. My sister needed at least 4 bathrooms because she refused to share with certain relatives who, in her words, never learned how to flush properly. My mom wanted a spot on or near a beach. No shock there. She pictures herself reading novels under a palm tree with the ocean breeze. A random in-law, whom I barely know, said something about needing strong Wi-Fi for business meetings. This always cracks me up because they end up doing 0 actual work on these trips. Naturally, the requests overlapped and conflicted, but I enjoy a challenge, so I dove into my research. Eventually, I found a beach house on Oahu. Let's call it Blue Waters Villa. It boasted a beautiful patio, a swimming pool, plenty of bedrooms, multiple bathrooms, my sister would be pleased, and it was a stone's throw from a relatively quiet section of beach. The price, once split among us, was surprisingly decent. I reached out to the host, let's call her Linda, who responded graciously. She offered a slight discount if we booked the whole week. Perfect. I posted all the details in the group chat. Of the 15 or so people who typically travel, about 12 said they'd come. A few dropped out for various reasons, work commitments, budget concerns, or simply a lack of interest. That's normal. The rest seemed on board. Everyone loved my post, left excited emojis, asked me if they could pay via PayPal or Venmo, so I put down the deposit using my credit card, confident that I'd get reimbursed eventually. The lull before the storm. The weeks leading up to the trip were standard for a family this large. A barrage of last-minute questions about flight times, rental cars, whether or not we should rent surfboards ahead of time, and so forth. I tried to coordinate it all patiently, though it's always like herding cats. Yet something odd happened about 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave. The group chat went dead. It was as if everyone collectively decided, let's not talk anymore. Initially, I assumed they were simply busy at work or dealing with personal stuff. Still, it was odd. Typically, they can't help themselves from sharing daily countdowns or comedic gifs of hula dancers. This time, nothing. I sent a few messages. Hey, does anyone need help with airport pickup or carpooling? Are we still good on check-in time? Everyone arrives by Tuesday afternoon, right? We should sort out who wants to share rooms. Let's finalize that by this weekend. No responses. Zero. Crickets. I have to admit, I was a bit unsettled, but I tried not to jump to conclusions. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe some members were dealing with a crisis, or had told everyone else to pause the chat. Life happens. The Instagram discovery. I will never forget the night I realized something was up. I was lying in bed, scrolling through Instagram for a quick mental break. That's when I spotted a story posted by my cousin. The same cousin who'd been ridiculously picky about the house location. She was on a beach. A beautiful sunny beach with turquoise water, leaning against a palm tree, taking selfies with half the family. At first I thought, okay, she went to Hawaii early with just her immediate family or something. But as I tapped through the stories, I saw familiar faces. My parents were there, laughing in the background. My aunts were posing with coconut drinks. My siblings were splashing in the waves with my younger cousins. Even some random second cousins I barely recognized. I felt a cold lump in my stomach. She'd tagged nearly everyone except me. And not just them, there were old classmates of hers, a bunch of extended relatives, even some people who aren't technically family. The entire group was there, except me. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. Could it be that they had all decided to fly out early for some reason? Why hadn't anyone told me? Surely it was just a portion of the group, right? The official check-in for the Airbnb wasn't until 2 days later. Yet, from her stories, it looked like a massive chunk of them were already in Hawaii. It was evening. On my end, so in Hawaii, it was still daylight. They were presumably living it up, sipping cocktails or whatever else they were doing, without me. Then, at about midnight my time, a text popped up from that very cousin. Hey, sorry, we forgot to tell you. The family left early. Hope there's no hard feelings. I had to reread it 4 times to believe it. Forgot to tell me? How does an entire group of 12 people pack their bags, board flights to Hawaii, and forget to tell the one person who coordinated the entire trip, the person whose name the Airbnb was under, the person whose credit card had already been charged for part of the reservation? The more I thought about it, the more furious I became. In that moment, I experienced a rush of emotions I can't fully describe. It was a toxic brew of betrayal, hurt, anger, and a perverse sense of amusement at how incompetent their plan was. Because if they'd truly intended to exclude me, they'd at least have the foresight not to rely on my Airbnb booking, right? The Airbnb is still in my name, and that was the critical oversight on their part. They left me behind, but guess what? The Airbnb was still my reservation, under my profile, using my Superhost account with my credit card. That's when the petty, and arguably justified part of me reared its head. I opened the Airbnb app, checked the cancellation policy for Blue Waters Villa, and found that I was still within the free cancellation window. You see, Linda, the host, had a policy that allowed a full refund if canceled at least 48 hours before check-in. Our official check-in was 2 days away. I was within that narrow window. If I canceled now, I'd get every penny back, no penalties. And guess who would be left scrambling in Hawaii to find new lodgings at the last minute? They would. I hesitated for a moment. This was a big decision. Canceling an entire family's lodging. My mind swirled with guilt. They're still my parents, my siblings, aunts, uncles. But then I remembered they were also the people who just left me out of a vacation I'd spent weeks planning. People who apparently forgot to invite me to the very trip I had organized. If that wasn't a betrayal, I didn't know what was. So I pressed cancel. A moment later, a pop-up confirmed that the reservation was gone. The property was no longer booked under my name, and Airbnb processed my full refund. I set my phone aside, feeling both adrenaline and relief. In my mind, I told myself, you reap what you sow, family. I turned off my phone for the rest of the night. I didn't want to see the incoming texts or calls, not yet. Let them figure it out. The next morning, pandemonium. When I woke up, my phone was vibrating with repeated notifications. I'd amassed 14 missed calls, 8 voicemails, and countless texts. One voicemail was from my mother, her usually calm voice tinted with panic, asking why the host wouldn't let them in. Another was from my father, sounding both confused and angry. My cousin, the original messenger, left a frantic text. Wait, did you cancel the house? Yes, I did. Apparently, they had arrived at the rental property close to midnight, expecting to check in. The host refused to let them in because there was no longer a valid reservation. They'd argued, pleaded, shown screenshots of the old confirmation, but it was gone, canceled. The host wasn't going to risk letting a large group of random people into her expensive beach house without a valid booking. Meanwhile, hotels in the area were either full or priced sky high because it was near peak season. My uncle ended up shelling out an absurd amount for a luxury suite just so that a few of them had somewhere to sleep. Others spent hours driving around looking for a vacant room. It was madness. I'm not going to lie. I felt a little thrill of satisfaction. All those times they'd brushed me off or taken me for granted, all the times I'd bent over backward to help plan these trips, only to be forgotten at the 11th hour? Now they understood the consequences of excluding the person who literally held the keys. Eventually, I replied to the group text. It was a single message. "Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you. I canceled the reservation. Hope there's no hard feelings." I even added the same smirking emoji my cousin had used in one of her earlier texts. It was the digital equivalent of a mic drop. Then I muted the conversation again because the onslaught of replies was giving me whiplash. A storm of blame and backpedaling. The fallout was immediate. Half the family was outraged, calling me everything from immature to vengeful. The other half seemed stunned or secretly in agreement with me but too afraid to say so publicly. A few tried to call me directly. I ignored most of those calls. I did pick up when my dad called because I still love my parents despite everything. Dad, angry and confused. "How could you do that? We're out here with no place to stay." Me, "I don't know, Dad. How could you guys fly out without telling me? How could you post pictures with the entire family and exclude me from the trip I organized?" He stammered for a moment. "We didn't mean to exclude you entirely. It was a last-minute decision to come early. Everyone found a good flight. Deal? And your mother and I were told you couldn't get off work earlier." Me, "So, did anyone think to confirm that with me? Send me a text? A phone call? A smoke signal? Anything?" He was silent. I could hear my mom in the background, probably feeling guilty. Eventually, he tried to reason with me. "Well, can't you rebook the house?" he asked. He claimed the family would pay me back for any additional costs, that they'd make it up to me somehow. I refused. The damage was done. I said I was well within my rights to cancel. You weren't planning on letting me stay there anyway, so why should I maintain the booking on my credit card? If you guys need a place, you can go rebook it yourselves, if it's even still available. We ended the call on a frosty note. He said he was disappointed in how I was handling things, and I told him I was disappointed in how they'd treated me. A stalemate, basically. The price they paid. Over the next few days, I got periodic updates, mostly from relatives who were less angry at me and more stunned by the situation. It turned out that Blue Waters Villa had gotten rebooked almost immediately by another party. The listing was popular after all. Linda, the host, probably had a wait list or at least a bunch of inquiries. With the free cancellation, it went back on the market and someone snapped it up. That meant my family, 12 people or so, had to find lodging at the last minute in Honolulu during a busy season. Some ended up in overpriced hotel suites, others in cramped Airbnb rooms scattered around the city. They spent hours coordinating meetups, trying to salvage the big family experience. But without a central house, they missed out on shared meals, group hangouts in a communal living room, or lazy evenings on the same patio. It turned into a logistical nightmare, which ironically is exactly what I try to avoid by being so organized. One cousin told me that she and her husband had to fork out $200 for a single night in a premium hotel because it was literally the only place that had a vacancy by the time they'd called. Another group stayed in a rundown motel with questionable cleanliness. My Aunt Sharon, who wanted a big kitchen so she could cook, was left with a mini fridge and a microwave in a standard hotel room, complaining the entire time. And me? I was at home, halfway across the country, sipping my coffee and enjoying the show from a distance. I know that sounds cold, but consider how it felt to be blatantly excluded. After all the work I'd done, they left me behind with nothing, more than a cursory text. So yeah, I felt justified watching them scramble. I also felt a pang of sadness and disappointment that our family had come to this. But hey, actions have consequences. Flashbacks to previous trips. In the days that followed, I couldn't help but think back to earlier trips, the ones where I'd saved the family's bacon repeatedly. The Florida trip. Years ago, we went to Orlando for a Disney vacation. Half the family hadn't even bothered to buy tickets in advance. I was the one who showed them how to use the My Disney Experience app, how to snag fast passes, and how to avoid paying for overpriced park tickets on third-party sites. We stayed in a huge vacation home near Kissimmee because I'd found a sweet deal through a friend who was a property manager. Everyone praised me for being the best planner ever, especially when we discovered we were able to check in a day early at no extra cost. The Colorado cabin. Another time, we rented a ski cabin in Breckenridge. The property manager tried to pull a last-minute switch on us, claiming the cabin was double booked. I spent an entire evening on the phone negotiating, showing proof of our reservation, and refusing to budge until they honored the contract. In the end, they upgraded us to a slightly nicer cabin for no extra charge. My family was thrilled, telling me how grateful they were that I'd fought on their behalf. The beachside getaway in the Carolinas. We once organized a beach trip in the Carolinas. That was the year a hurricane skirted the coast and forced a partial evacuation. I spent hours calling the insurance company to see if we'd get a refund, coordinating with the host to see if we could reschedule. Thanks to my efforts, we moved the trip by a few days and ended up having a great time once the storm passed. In all these scenarios, I was basically the unsung hero. Sure, they said thank you, but it often felt like once the trip was over, they forgot about the effort I'd poured in. I didn't mind at first. Family is family. You do it out of love. But over time, it wears you down, especially when you realize you're being taken for granted or, in this case, blatantly cut out.
Why this time hurt more? You might wonder if I'd had a falling out with the family earlier that would explain this exclusion. But honestly, there wasn't any major argument before they left. The group chat was active right up until it
went silent. I suspect what happened was that one or two people decided it would be cheaper or more convenient convenient to head out early, and then word spread, and eventually the entire group hopped on the plan without me. Maybe some of them assumed I'd come later, maybe some truly forgot to inform me, but ultimately, nobody stepped up to say, wait, we have to tell them. That's what hurt the most. In a healthy family dynamic, even if a handful of folks decided to go early, someone would have made sure I was informed. My parents, at least, would have texted to confirm my flight details or ask about my schedule, but no one did. It was a collective oversight that felt suspiciously like deliberate exclusion. And maybe it was because they knew if they told me they were going early, I'd ask why, or try to re-coordinate the rental dates. They didn't want that. They just wanted to do their own thing and let me handle the rest, apparently forgetting that I am the rest in terms of the Airbnb booking. The blowback from extended family word traveled fast among relatives who weren't on the trip. My phone started buzzing with texts from cousins in other states, or from an aunt who rarely travels but is always in the know about family gossip. They were asking, what's going on with the Hawaii trip? I heard there was drama. Some had heard only one side of the story, probably that I'd pettily canceled the reservation, leaving everyone stranded. I took the time to explain my perspective to those who mattered to me. They all flew out early without telling me. They said they forgot to invite me, even though I organized the entire thing. Usually, once they heard that, they understood why I did what I did. Some even applauded me, saying, good for you, they deserved it. Others tried to stay neutral, saying, it's a shame it had to come to that. My grandparents, who are too old to travel that far, were disappointed in the family for letting such a rift form. They called me, concerned, wanting to hear my version. I told them the truth. They sighed and said they hoped we'd sort it out eventually. That's the typical grandparent approach, always wanting the family to make peace. But they didn't chastise me directly. I think they could sense I'd been wronged. My personal feelings and reflection. Despite the justified satisfaction, I felt a deep sense of sadness. I realized that the closeness I once felt with my family was likely shattered. Even if we could patch things up superficially, I'd never quite trust them the same way. The next time we plan a trip, if we plan a trip, I won't be so quick to volunteer as the coordinator. I'd want things in writing, or I'd ask for a deposit from everyone up front. The days of me fronting money or carefully orchestrating travel details for them were over. I took a few days off work during what would have been the Hawaii trip, not because I planned to travel, but just to decompress. I used that time to focus on myself, went out with friends, read some good books, took local day trips to places I'd been meaning to visit. It wasn't Hawaii, but it was still relaxing in its own way, and I had the comfort of knowing I wasn't spending a single dollar more on a trip that, in essence, I was not truly invited to. Sometimes, though, late at night, a wave of regret would wash over me. Should I have canceled the Airbnb? Could I have handled it differently, like letting them stay but confronting them after? Possibly. But every time I started to second-guess my decision, I remembered that text. Sorry, we forgot to tell you. Hope there's no hard feelings. They acted as though I was a random acquaintance, not a core member of the family. That's what sealed my decision as correct. They had it coming. Clashes and attempts at making amends. When the family finally returned from their chaotic Hawaii misadventure, I had a few one-on-one talks. My mother insisted on meeting in person. We had tea at her kitchen table, just me and her. She looked tired, worn out from the stress of it all. Mom, I really am sorry. Your dad and I were told by your cousin that you couldn't come early, that you had work. We didn't realize you never got the memo about the changed flights. I studied her face, trying to see if she was sincere. But you or dad could have called me directly, I said, my voice calm but firm. Why rely on my cousin to pass the message along? And even if I couldn't come early, why not still treat me like part of the group? Why ghost me in the chat? She didn't have a satisfying answer, just mumbled that it was a busy time, everything happened so fast, etc. I believed that she felt remorse. My mom usually does. But I also realized that she and dad had gone along with the plan, ignoring the ramifications. As for my dad, he apologized too, but in a more awkward, roundabout way. He kept saying he understood why I was angry, but also wished I'd found a better solution than canceling on them. I told him point blank, a better solution would have been you telling me you were leaving early in the first place. Then we could have changed the reservation accordingly or sorted out a fair arrangement. He nodded, not looking me in the eye, which told me enough. The cousin who started it all, the cousin who posted the Instagram stories, let's call her Jenny, tried to justify herself by saying, I assumed someone else would tell you. In a testy phone call, she accused me of being dramatic for canceling the Airbnb. She said I'd ruined the family trip and made everyone spend a fortune on hotels. I let her talk for a while, listening to her go in circles. Then, I asked her one simple question. If you were in my position, if you'd organized everything, paid for it, and then discovered the rest of us had gone without telling you, would you keep the reservation intact just so we could enjoy it without you? She paused, flustered. I mean, I guess not, but I wouldn't have done something so extreme. I would have, talked to the family first. I laughed, unable to hide my frustration. You didn't give me that courtesy when you all left early. Nobody talked to me then. Don't dish it out if you can't take it. The conversation ended with her insisting that I could have been more understanding. I told her to look in the mirror, remembering to put myself first. This incident taught me a powerful lesson about family boundaries. Too often, we're guilted into sacrificing our own feelings and time for relatives because that's what family does. But being family doesn't entitle people to walk all over you or exclude you without consequences. Setting boundaries might feel harsh, but sometimes it's necessary for your own sanity and self-respect. For me, canceling the Airbnb was that boundary. It was a wake-up call not just for them, but also for me. I realized I'd spent so much of my adult life trying to accommodate everyone else's needs, often neglecting my own. The moment I saw that Instagram post, something in me snapped. I realized it was time to protect my own interests. The ripple effect. In the months that followed, the family dynamics shifted. People were more cautious around me. I wasn't as active in the group chat. I basically told them, if you want me to help plan something, you better be transparent with me. And by the way, if I detect even a whiff of being taken advantage of, I'm out. Some took my side, like my sister, who admitted she hadn't. Realized how deeply this would hurt me. Others, like certain uncles, believed I overreacted. The reality is that it's easier for them to point fingers than to reflect on their own part in the fiasco. Meanwhile, extended relatives who heard the story were divided. A few labeled me the villain, but many supported me. One of my older cousins, who rarely joins these trips, said, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. They do treat you like the free travel agent. Indeed, that's exactly how it felt sometimes. What happened to the Hawaii dream? From what I gathered, the family's rushed piecemeal accommodations in Hawaii were a nightmare. They had to split into groups, staying in different hotels or vacation rentals far apart from each other. Some ended up in Waikiki, others near the North Shore, and coordinating group activities became nearly impossible. They had to rent multiple cars, spend extra on Uber rides, and juggle conflicting schedules. My Aunt Sharon never got to cook her big family meals because she didn't have a proper kitchen. My dad missed out on certain outings because he didn't have the right ride arrangements. People were bickering even more than usual. To add insult to injury, the costs soared. Last-minute hotel rooms in a place like Honolulu can be astronomical, especially for bigger suites. I heard stories about them paying quadruple the usual rate, so much for a leisurely family vacation. I can only imagine the conversation on the last day when they realized they'd spent a fortune on a trip that was supposed to be well-organized and cost-effective. They could have had a beautiful beach house if they'd just included me. Instead, they learned the hard way. Treat the coordinator with respect or pay the consequences. Literally. A note from the host. A couple of weeks after the trip ended, for them, I received a polite message on the Airbnb platform from Linda, the property host. She said she was sorry to hear about the cancellation and hoped everything was okay. She mentioned she'd managed to rebook her property with another family, so she wasn't at a loss financially. She simply wanted to check if we'd had an emergency. I replied politely, saying, there was a family matter that required me to cancel, but I'm glad you found another booking. Perhaps I'll rent from you in the future under better circumstances. She wrote back, understanding and wishing me well. It was civil and pleasant. I got my refund in full, which felt like poetic justice, a final stamp of closure on the fiasco. Epilogue. The aftermath and looking forward. It's been several months now. The dust has mostly settled, though. The incident still comes up at family gatherings, typically in hushed tones or in cautionary jokes. Some folks will make sly references like, don't get on their bad side or you'll lose your hotel room, which is half joking, half serious. I notice my parents tensing up whenever the topic surfaces. Our big annual family trips are likely forever changed. If someone else wants to book next year's lodging, more power to them. I'm done being the unpaid travel agent. If they want my help, they'll have to earn my trust again. No more blind loyalty from me. If that sounds cold, so be it. Everyone has a breaking point. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever recapture the sense of unity we once had, even if it was partially an illusion. Family trips used to be chaotic but fun, because we were all under one roof, laughing at each other's quirks, building memories in the same space. Now, there's a fracture in that foundation, a sense that any big plan could implode if communication isn't handled properly. But maybe that's a lesson we all needed to learn. Life's too short to be walked over by the very people who are supposed to have your back. Standing up for yourself, even in dramatic fashion, can be a turning point, an uncomfortable but necessary shift. If my family truly values my presence and my organizational skills, they'll treat me better next time. If not, then maybe it's time I traveled on my own, or with friends who actually respect my contributions.